Hey everyone, it's Nina. Thanks for joining me today for a new video. Are you ready to try out something fun? So Simon Says Stamp sent me some of the brand new Tim Holtz Distress Crayons, which are pearlized. They are so pretty. If you've ever played with Distress Crayons, you know how fun they are. Well, these are like a step up from those because these have a really gorgeous pearlized finish to them. It's really hard to describe. It's kind of one of those things you have to see it to believe it. So I'm going to be using those crayons today in this project, but if you don't have these, you could totally use any Distress crayons that you already have. This technique does not require them to be pearlized. I'm just using them because I have them. So in today's project, we're going to create a background with it. But what I wanted to do was create something unique. And I thought to myself, well, Distress crayons can be used in so many different ways. Of course, it's hard to decide what to do. However, I thought about how Distress crayons work really well on top of a treated surface. So like paste or collage medium, they perform beautifully because they blend well because they're not being absorbed into the paper. So that got me thinking, what if I put Distress crayons on top of Simon Says Stamp's new White Glossy Cardstock? Oh my gosh, that worked so good. So let me show you what I did. I'm taping one of Simon Says Stamp's layering snowflake stencils. It's actually a stencil set I happened to design for Simon. And I'm using the stencil that comes in the set. There's 3 stencils, 2 of which are layering pieces, and then the other one is the entire design as one stencil. I'm using that one. And I've pulled out some transparent gloss paste. And I'm going to very carefully apply this through the stencil onto that white glossy cardstock. Now, when I say carefully, you want to make sure you do apply this very gently because glossy cardstock has a tendency to want to allow things to move because it's slick. So I very carefully lifted this stencil off after doing all of my paste, and I'm going to let this dry. Look how good it already looks. This is when the paste was still wet. Magically, here it is when it's dry. I've trimmed the paper down. I worked with a larger sheet because I wanted to be able to figure out where exactly I wanted to cut this paper down into a card size, and I was willing to sacrifice the extra paper in order to be able to have a little bit more freedom in where I'm going to chop this paper down. So our paste is dry, and I'm taking 3 of the new Distress crayons and I'm scribbling them over top of this paste and onto the white glossy cardstock. So in the new Distress crayon sets, there's 2 for each holiday collection. So you've got 2 sets of Halloween themed crayons and then 2 sets of Christmas themed crayons. I'm using a mix of both Christmas and Halloween here. So once I applied my layer of crayon over top of my background here, I'm going to take my fingers and I'm going to start smudging these colors around. This is like finger painting here. And I'm using multiple fingers to try to not contaminate too much from one color to the next because I do want to have some definition of color here. I don't want it all to be one blob of color. I want those variations here and there. So finger by finger, I'm going to go through the background and blend those colors together. Once I have done so, I'm going to then take a damp towel and very carefully buff off the snowflakes. Not the background. I'm not trying to get rid of all the color on the background because, of course, this is still wet Distress crayon, even though it's not wet, but it's still pliable Distress crayon. So we don't want to move this too much. Once I have my first layer down, then I'm going to start adding more crayon and blending that again to create more variation and more blend between the colors. Again, I'll go back through with my damp cloth and buff off the snowflakes. And this is where I stopped. I liked how this was looking and I decided I wasn't going to play with it anymore. And instead, I let it dry. So my crayons are now dry. They're not workable anymore. And this background is ready to be turned into a card. Look how good those snowflakes look. So now that I had my background completed, that let me chop it down to just smaller than a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 A2 card. I'm going to turn this into, are you ready? An edge-to-edge shaker. I told you in my last video that I was going to be making more of these edge-to-edge shaker cards because I love them and I'm addicted to them. Well, here you go. We're back to making another edge-to-edge shaker card. So I'm covering the back of my panel, and if you've watched any of my other videos for edge-to-edge shaker cards, you know what I'm doing here. I'm covering that panel with red line tape around all the edges. Now that I have all the tape put down, I can press that really well into my cardstock and then gently lift the release paper off of all of the edges of the adhesive. So now we have this sticky background. We're going to go ahead and lay this on top of a piece of plastic. This happens to be from some stamped packaging. And I'm very carefully going to start folding the edges of that plastic onto the adhesive. So we're wrapping our card panel inside of this plastic, and that's creating an enclosure that we can put some embellishments in. And we're not going to do just sequins this time. Remember how I told you that you could put glitter inside of these shakers? Well, I'm going to prove to you that you can. So I'm going to very carefully trim off any excess plastic that might be hanging outside the corners of my card. It's not necessary, but if you do have some edges that are kind of peeking out around the card, trim those up. And now we're going to fill our shaker. So I pulled out some sequins from Simon. These colors look so good with the snowflakes, and I love those silver stars in there. So I'm going to put a few of those in here. I don't want to fill this too heavy though. And then I also am going to pull in some Prisma glitter from Simon Says Stamp. This is the Unicorn Dust, and I'm very carefully just adding a small amount in here, tapping it down to the bottom to see how it looks with the sequins, because I don't want to fill this too heavy so that you can't see our beautiful background that we've created. Once it's filled to my liking, I'll go ahead and close up that last edge where we added in all of our sequins and glitter. And then my last step is to bring in that red line tape again and cover the background with the adhesive so that I can attach this down onto my A2 size card base. I'm going to want to make sure I get those sequins and glitter moving around quite a bit so it's more evenly spaced across my card. And then I can remove the release paper off of my background and lay it down into the card base. So we have officially made a glitter-filled edge-to-edge shaker. And I wanted you to see that so that you could see for yourself that using glitter inside of an edge-to-edge shaker card is the least messiest way of making a glitter-filled shaker. Because if you are like me, you've tried to fill your shaker cards with glitter before, and no matter how hard you try, you always end up getting glitter to fall out of your shaker cards that you made with foam tape. So this technique works amazing in holding the glitter in place. I do not have any glitter flying around when I'm making this card. I've pulled out this sentiment, which is peace, hope, love, and joy from Simon Says Stamp, and I'm going to die cut it from Simon's silver matte cardstock. After I've cut that die cut out, I will remove it from the paper, take out all the little negative pieces, and then I also die cut it twice more from some white cardstock. Recently, I shared with you my favorite new way for adhering stacked die cuts together, and that's with using a glue stick. So I have Simon's glue stick here, and I'm using that to very gently apply some adhesive on top of my die cuts. Make sure you don't press too hard because you don't want glue kind of squishing out around the letters and creating a very messy adhering of your stacked die cuts. So very gentle pressure, and then just stack everything together. To adhere this down onto the plastic, I do want something a little bit more stronger that will hold on to a variety of surfaces. So that's where I pulled out the Simon Says Stamp Craft Tacky Glue, because that will hold down really well onto this plastic. After I've laid my sentiment right in the center here, we're almost done, but I wanted to add a secondary greeting. So I pulled out these sentiment strips from Simon Says Stamp, and these are our Christmas theme set. They're new from Simon's Peace on Earth release, and I'm trimming these down and figuring out which exact sentiment I want to use for my card. I ended up choosing this one here, and I'm going to color it with a Copic marker to more closely match the blues in my card. This will get popped up underneath my large die cut greeting, and I'll use a couple pieces of foam tape on either end to really hold that sentiment down and give it some dimension. Because we have these stacked die cuts, they're a little bit more lifted off of the card, so I need something to pop this greeting up so it's a little bit higher than the level of the die cuts. With all these extra sentiment strips already cut, I have been loving having these storage pockets from Simon Says Stamp. They're perfectly sized to fit your sentiment strips, and all those little snipped off sentiments can go right into the packet, and they can hold together really nicely so that I know exactly where they came from later on when I'm trying to figure out what greeting I want to use on my card. I don't have any random sentiment strips floating around. My last step was to add a few more sequins. Yeah, I know, a shaker card filled with sequins and I don't have enough yet. But I'm going to go ahead and put a few sequins on top of my shaker so that it really helps balance things out when the card isn't being shaken around and everything has fallen to the bottom. This will help fill in the background a little bit more. But check out those crayons in that background and how the texture paste that we added through the stencil resisted those beautiful crayons, creating this amazing texture and gorgeous color variation. I just love how this card turned out. It looks like a totally snowy, wintry scene in there, and everything came together perfectly. This was the idea I had in my head. Once I came up with the idea of doing the glossy cardstock, I immediately thought snowflakes and shaker cards, and well, here we are. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. I hope you were inspired by this project. Maybe you have some Distress crayons already in your stash and you have some glossy cardstock. Try it out. I think you'll have a lot of fun pulling this technique together. Like I said, you do not need to have the Pearlescent Distress crayons that I use today. I just used those because I have them, and a big thank you to Simon for sending them to me. As a note on those crayons, I do believe they may be a limited edition kind of thing. Tim Holtz has been releasing some unique products that are only available while supplies last. So, for instance, some of the pearlescent distress mica stains, those were a limited edition release and are only available until supplies last. Once the supplies are gone, then they won't be brought back to market. So I don't know if the crayons are going to be that same way, but I'm going to assume possibly, because they're not the same colors that are in the Distress line. They're a new version of colors. So check them out if you're interested. I have links to everything down below in the video description. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I appreciate it so very much. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you watching the videos that I post. I hope they are inspiring to you. I hope you enjoy, and I can't wait to come back and see you all again very soon with more to share. Have a great day.